Om Tare Du Tare Du Re Soha. Om Tare Du Tare Du Re Soha. Om Tare Du Tare Du Re Soha. Om Tare Du Tare.
Okay, well, good to be with all of you. What do you want to talk about today? What's on the agenda? The discussion we had last week, I wanted to come back to. We had a really kind of, I think, an evolving introduction to the refuge prayer and our bodhicitta motivation. And then, at the end, we kind of tapped into that. So I didn't want to pick that up. But yeah, before I get into that, I do want to check, anyone have any questions or thoughts that have come up in your practice? Curiosities, the big questions. Okay, well, if they do, you know how to unmute. All right. So last week, we were getting into the refuge prayer. We've been spending quite a bit of time in the text on Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha nature, and a lot of it has been on our afflictions, our misperceptions, our struggles. And so last week, I thought it'd be nice to kind of focus in on the solution, what we can do, what's meaningful and productive. And so we had a talk about, what it is to take refuge, to feel safe, what is reliable, and what is this that I can take refuge in. And the refuge prayer that we just recited, I take refuge until I'm enlightened in the Buddhist, the Dharma, and the Sangha. That was our first point of reference and of entry. And what we recognized last week was, and we're talking about refuge, something I can rely upon, something that is dependable, something that's safe. Well, we talked about wisdom, truth. You can't rely upon truth, then, what are we doing? What can we rely upon? And that the whole path of Dharma is about relying on truth, on reality. And if we actually could recognize how we actually exist, we'll suffer less and ultimately would be liberated from all suffering. And that was the Buddha's big epiphany. This is what he discovered, is that all of this suffering is really unnecessary. It's just from misperception. And then we went through all the layers of just a conventional human being wants to suffer less, have a good life, doesn't need to be a Buddhist or believe anything beyond this life. That it's the same investigation, the same path: ethics, concentration, wisdom, virtue, healthy behaviors, taming the mind, so I'm not a prisoner of it, and wisdom, right? Understanding actual causes of suffering and happiness. And on a very straightforward level, we understood that I'm going to suffer a lot less when I do things I feel good about, and I'm going to suffer a lot more when I do things I don't feel good about. So we went through all that. I don't want to redo the whole thing. But fundamentally, when we think about what is it we can rely upon, what holds up? And what actually holds up? What is dependable? And so the Dharma is the truth. And the Buddha would be someone who offers the truth. The Sangha is the support that helps us as well. But ultimately, Dharma is the medicine. And Dharma does not need to be Buddhist. Truth is truth. Nobody has a copyright on it. Well, I'm sure somebody does somewhere. They copyrighted it. Yeah, probably get a cease and desist letter at some point. And so in this method here, then we take a look at, what's true, what can we rely upon. And what I wanted to get to was an interesting discussion that I had today with a group. And the question was, what is sanity? So I asked them all right now, what's sanity mean to you? What is sane? And some people came up, with some pretty interesting thoughts around that. But one person had a very direct statement. Sanity is not hurting yourself. Well, that's pretty good. Kind of insane to do things that hurt ourselves, right? And then if we kind of put that in a Dharma context, why do we do things all day that undermine our sense of self and well-being? And how do we spend our time distracting our mind instead of stabilizing our mind? How much, as Shanti Dev would say, we want happiness and we run for the causes of suffering. And so it's like I do all these things that get me more attached, more self-centered, and create a lot of suffering in my life instead of fundamentally doing the things I know are healthy, well, meaningful, and I'd feel better about. And so that's I think a good spot here to kind of look at human existence. And all of you heard me say many times, and I think it's just absolutely true, that's why I keep saying it, is that we can all make a list of the things that we know that would absolutely improve our lives. 5 things. And then the question is, why don't we do the list? I mean, all day long, I know people, and matter of fact, I had some other groups where it's been a full day. Yeah, I know meditation's good for me. Yeah, I'm not doing it, but I know it's good for me. I know, I'd be healthier if, I spent a little time, doing this activity or doing a little study or calling and connecting with someone, but, I'm not going to do it. And so we started thinking, well, why is it difficult to do the things I know would be healthy and supportive of my development, my well-being? And why do I really take refuge in these mundane activities that do provide short-term stimulation, but rob me from the liberation and freedom that I seek? If any of you have an answer for that, I'm delighted to hear it. Greta.
An answer for why don't we do the things that are healthy for us?
Yeah. Why do we harm ourselves when we're trying to be happy?
I would say, and I could be wrong, I would say
they're all good answers.
I would say conditioning.
Yeah, a lot of conditioning, right? A lot of habit. So we talk about the karma and sort of habit and conditioning that we have. And so in our delusion, which is a nice way of saying insanity, this sounds better, doesn't it? It is I think I'm going to find happiness, if I get this, right situation, or get to do this activity, or get to buy this house, or get to, have this vacation, or get to have this relationship, or, just all those things that we typically, think of as success. And so we take refuge in these things. We think, okay, I get that, then I'll be happy. I'll be well, it'll be fine. And then we get all those things. And guess what? I can still have anxiety, I can still have stress, I can still have worry, I can still have fear. still getting old, which, by the way, beats the alternative. And, things happen, things get messy. And even though we have all had more abundance than we can imagine, I mean, compare ourselves to the other 90% of the world's population. I mean, we're doing pretty good here. We got food, clothing, shelter. Some people have a high thread count on their sheets. They're pretty awesome. And some people, can regulate their beds. They have one with the little snoring alert thing. Have you ever seen that? It's got a little thing in the foot of bed. Your partner snores. It does this little thing to kind of wake them up. I think that's pretty cool. That'll make you happy, get your partner to stop snoring. And, so we have all these devices and we have all these things. Heck, I'm not even sure how many kinds of kombucha you can get. But, and I can still be fearful, anxiety. I can go into depression. I can struggle. And so despite all evidence to the contrary, I can still have a belief that if I just get this stuff right, like this is really important for my happiness. Okay. And then what happens is we get attached to all that stuff because we believe that this is the source of my happiness. And then we suffer. We have to protect it. We don't want to lose it. And we stress that, things might get robbed or we might not get the next thing. And we go through a cycle again and again and again. And then the story is, but if this happens today, it'll all be good. Or if this next thing happens, or if I get that. So they call it the hedonic treadmill in psychology. It's that carrot in front of us, But then the realization comes at some point that maybe what they've been telling me my whole life is true. Just possibly what all the philosophers, all the therapists, all the wisdom traditions, indigenous people, so maybe what they're saying is true. And that is that your happiness is not contingent on these external things, the primary cause. And we think, okay, well, where's the research? I need data. So now there's a whole bunch of data, which goes to show that a lot more has to do with our attitudes and perspectives to the degree with which we suffer. It's not the event so much as how I relate to it. And that the real cause is within the outer circumstances are conditions that might trigger happiness or suffering. But I can work with the inside piece. So we're going back to refuge. Do I take refuge in my external circumstances and my high thread count? I think if it gets too high, you just kind of slip out of your bed, right? I don't know. I think you got to hit a middle ground there. I like flannel sheets, side note, but Laura doesn't. Creates a lot of suffering. So I'm sure she'll let me get them on this winter. So then why am I taking refuge in all day? And why is it so difficult sometimes to do the things that I know pretty healthy? We came up with conditioning. So the conditioning is where I'm trying to get to, which Greta gave the answer. So Greta, how do we change all that conditioning since, he gave us the...
Oh my God.
But
Practice?
That's a pretty good answer. Right.
Spiritual bypass.
No, not that. So the thing about conditioning is, we can recondition, right? We can recondition. And so I was in another talk, another session day with a bunch of therapists. And, how do we recondition? And it's one thing to know something, like they help people all day change their lives and do things that they can't do themselves. Which is quite, there's a lot of burnout in the mental health field because we're not doing it, we're teaching others to do it. And now they're doing it. And so if we want to recondition, what we need, the word came up, evidence. Some evidence. So when I'm doing these things that I feel good about, that are virtuous, we just did a whole retreat on Sunday on virtue, valuing virtue, which is quite wonderful. And, Keith shared a lot of evidence that he's had in his life in adverse situations and a high level of well-being. And so if we look at our lives and we need evidence to recondition to reality, requires mindfulness. It requires being in that moment, noticing the worry, the fear, the anxiety, the attachment, and then taking a course of action that is productive and seeing how, no matter how worked up I was, that it didn't have the impact I was worried about. And how I felt when I engaged in virtue, when I was, just honest or helpful and didn't worry about an outcome. What's the difference in my life when I'm attached to an outcome, and what's the difference in my life when I'm not attached to an outcome? What's that feel like? What's it like to experience it rather than talk about it, right? We can have these nice, rich discussions, but fundamentally, I need to experience it directly and notice a huge difference if I'm living in a way I feel good about and not stressing over the belief system or the attachment to an outcome. In order to do this, it needs to be more of a lived experience. So practice is a good answer, right? Practice is it each and every day. I try to note when I'm stressed, when I'm frustrated, when I'm angry, when I'm sad, or so forth. Does that relate to some kind of belief system about an outcome? Which would be the source of my happiness? And we might discover there's a lot of refuge in those things. So in this first sentence, which we're taking just a smattering of time to unpack, we literally say, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Which, are those words, or can we reflect on that and go, can I take refuge in the truth? And the support that helps me find the truth in reality. And is my working hypothesis, the more I live in reality, the less I suffer. The less I exaggerate outcomes, the less I'll suffer. And then see what happens. And then we have this capacity for evidence, results. So this path then becomes something that at the retreat on Sunday, was it Pasquale's wager? Was that Pasquale? Pasquale's wager. Which was, if you have this belief, you're all in. In his case, it was like God, heaven, you're all in. You believe in that. His wager is, even if you're wrong, you'll be okay, right? Like there's not a downside, right? There's not a downside. And so here, if we want to have some real refuge, we can put in a wager. the working hypothesis is the way I prefer to do it. And maybe if the working hypothesis plays out a little bit, then I might make the wager. As the wager goes, once you're all in, you're all in. Okay. And so for one of my wagers, I mean, I actually believe that any mental emotional affliction I have is based on misperception. I'm pretty clear on that. That's where I've gotten to at some point over a few decades of playing with this. And so it doesn't even compute in my head now that you could be the cause of my anger. Like, that it does not compute, not there anymore. And that happened over a period of time, me testing whether you could be the cause of my anger. And what was the real cause of my anger is my belief system about the cause of my happiness and not, and that you're in my way of it or not. And a lot to do with how you should behave so I could be happy. And how pointless it is trying to get you to behave. So that comes through with practice, with testing, with experimentation. And so can we take a working hypothesis in we talked a little while back about the 3 marks of existence, and is there any stress, worry, or fear that's based in reality? We can check those things. Here I'm putting forth just the idea of is your happiness contingent on these things, which is separate from pleasure. Yeah, pleasurable things. And there's nothing wrong with pleasurable things. As a matter of fact, you can create genuine happiness and well-being doing pleasurable things all day long. You can also get so caught up in those things, they take you away from the virtuous things. And we can even do non-virtuous things to feel good in our activities. But if we're going to establish a refuge is a safe place. It's like in the storm. And what is it you can absolutely believe in? And so fundamentally, and Keith often speaks clearly about this from his experience, is do you feel better when you do things you feel good about? That's I think that one kind of holds up. When I do things I feel good about, they're ethical, virtuous, I'm going to feel pretty good about who I am. And when I do things I don't feel good about, I'm probably not going to feel very good about it. And so going back to Sunday's retreat, is non-virtue, unwholesome behavior the cause of my mental emotional suffering? And put another way, back to sanity, can I do non-virtuous things and be happy? Can I do things I don't feel good about and feel good about who I am? And we go back to sanity. Do I do a lot of things I don't feel good about? And, there just might be some. So going back to our refuge, and we go, okay, then sanity and reality. Is it productive to criticize myself? Generally not. So again, what are actions and activities that support well-being, sense of worth, purpose, value, and baseline Buddhist straightforward working principle is all happiness and joy comes virtue, all suffering from no virtue. Matter of fact, that's the definition of virtue in Buddhism. Not that there's a judging person up there that says, oh, you did that, you're going to get in trouble, or you did that, we're going to reward you. It's actually defined the opposite. Any cause that creates a pleasurable outcome is thereby virtuous. Any cause that's going to create suffering is thereby non-virtuous and unwholesome. So it's actually works the other way around. It's kind of like, if something's going to lead to this beneficial result, well, then that's in alignment with growth, with karma, cause and effect, with well-being. And anything, sometimes we use the word unwholesome versus wholesome, or beneficial or non-beneficial. It's funny how you just change a word a little bit. Now I can swallow it. And so, I could say, well, anything you do that's helpful is beneficial. This is not beneficial. And now I can swallow it. But sometimes it's better to use those words because we have this conditioning, and we have Judeo-Christian, somebody up there punishing. And that's the hard part, is nobody's punishing anybody. We get to do this all by ourselves. We don't need any help from anyone. I can create my own suffering. I'm pretty good at it. And that there's no that you need to suffer in this way. It's actually quite the opposite. I can stop suffering. I can do things differently, and I can engage in practices that recondition to reality and support happiness and well-being. And so now we have kind of the foundation of a refuge. So I'm going to pause there because I've been talking for a little bit, and Greta's been giving us all the right answers. And see if anyone has any thoughts around this at this point. Will.
Hey, John. Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Jeez, here I come swinging out of the rafters. So some of these you just said really, really struck me, which is that whole thing about just how much guilt we give ourselves. That Judeo-Christian kind of belief that I know I have deeply ingrained in myself, that shame and any sort of wrong is over amplified versus any sort of virtuous act is just kind of considered should be standard. Do you have any thoughts about ways we can balance that better in the way that we interact with the world, or the way that we go about our lives?
Yeah, what you're sharing, I'm sure everybody can relate to, and it comes up in literally every retreat, and why we have such a harsh view on things. And one of the most straightforward methods for that, for me, is to realistically note all the good you're doing. Because if we just do the math, you're going to find that you do, hundreds of wonderful things all day. You're there for people. You screw up, and then, as you put it, right, that other stuff's just subpar. It's basic. This one event is where I screwed up. And this is where I'm less than. This is where I'm not as good as. And now we're back to that sort of original sin thinking. We come into the world flawed. We ate the apple, and we gotta pay for it. And so the other view from a Buddhist perspective is you have Buddha nature. There's nothing wrong with you. All this confusion is, conditioning, and it's not who you are. And it's the stuff we get to work on. And so my best view in my own personal practice, I mentioned I try to note the good. I try to note that, take inventory. But where I really have made gains is in recognizing where I fall short, how I respond. So when I fall short, what I've found that my self-critical attitude is self-centeredness. Right? It's all about me. It's just another self-centered process that's all about me. And it doesn't help anyone. It's like the worst thing I can do for anyone else is beat myself up. Because now I'm pitying me, I'm not good enough, it's all about me, I didn't do this, I'm worried about what others think, and it's all caught up in identity. And what I discovered is the most compassionate thing I can do for anyone else is accept and acknowledge that and grow from it. Like the thing that I can do that is most helpful for everyone else is to grow from this. And I owe it to them for that. So it goes from self-centered self-criticism to thinking of others and compassionate activity. And in that process, a simple example, yesterday I missed 2 scheduled appointments with me. Okay, and both of them were around mindfulness. Okay, so and one of them guys in Scotland, right? Wait a week, schedules appointment, and I didn't really see it. So anyway, got an email like, "Where's the Zoom link?" And so I noticed that. Now, beating myself up or whatever, I emailed him back and I had to say, "I'm sorry, I missed your appointment. I did not mindfully look at my calendar properly. I was looking at the wrong day. So I missed the thing. I'm sorry. What can I do? What can we do that?" And so in the past, that could have easily been yeah, Mr. Mindfulness here. You can't even make an appointment with a guy you trained to be mindful. Ace here. And then you think that's good enough. So I look at my calendar. I'm like, okay, I missed that. A couple hours later, I realized I missed another appointment, and 2 in a day, nailing it. Very, I am consistent. So, and what do? Do I beat myself up for that, or do I, I actually called him? I said, "Yeah, sorry, I missed the appointment." And anyway, we had a conversation, worked out. And in the past, little things like that, I would have beaten myself up. I would have said, missed that appointment. These people. Today, I owe it to that person to not do that. I owe it to that person. Well, guess what? Apparently, you're not a Buddha. You, look at wrong days. You miss things on a calendar, and quickly accept reality and learn and grow from it. The other avenue is ego, right? That's why I'm beating myself up. Ego. I should be the mindfulness teacher. I should be this, shouldn't forget that, blah, blah, blah. And so understanding that the most beneficial thing I can do is acknowledge a situation, grow from it, and not let my self-centered ego get stronger. And so that's been really productive for me, is that when and those are, some mess ups on my part, but I've done some bigger ones. But, if you got time. So is how quickly, and when I notice my self-centered ness of self-criticism, I move to compassion, that this is not helping anyone. And I owe it to others to heal, to grow, and to move on. So that's been one of my most beneficial ways. So basically, I'm better at thinking about others than I am myself. Right? I'll work harder for someone else. If it's just for me, I'm kind of lazy. And so it's been a shift where whenever I get that sort of self-centeredness, self-critical thought, I recognize that it's harming others and not just me. And so I, out of compassion, have learned to, I actually a lot of times visualize getting up, like I fell down and getting up to be helpful. So those are a couple things that have helped me a great deal. There was one more piece along that. If it comes back, I'll share. But Rita's had her hand up. I hope it's not tired.
No, it's not tired. I have a lot of resilience. So John, all that is really helpful. I am curious how long it took you to make that shift.
1 week retreat and 2 follow-up sessions.
Okay. All right. So it's pretty quick and easy to do. So
Absolutely.
that's a relief. And it's all really helpful. And it also all relies on having the mental capacity to tell myself all those things. And sometimes, speaking just for myself and no one else, I'm not able to do that. I can have all this intellectual awareness and readiness to say and do the right thing for myself. But there's this emotional and even physical like pit. And I find myself, I just can't crawl out of that pit. So there's that piece of the question. And then I think I need help. I need external validation. I need someone else to tell me that I'm good, that I'm doing a good job, that I'm valued. But I can't ask for that because that feels like falling into the 8 worldly concerns, seeking external validation. And you often say, if you're struggling, reach out and ask for support. But I fell into a hole and I wasn't able to find my way out because I couldn't reconcile asking for support without being a whiner or just caught up in needing external validation or something. And even though intellectually I knew everything to do, which is all what you said and more, I couldn't do it by myself. So what then, John?
You know, it's almost like you're a plant in the audience. Because you're spot on with so many of the kind of traps that we get into, and especially when we're practicing Dharma, we'll sit there and think, well, Bodhisattva wouldn't have these external needs for validation, and we might forget that I'm not a Bodhisattva. Oh, I'm a human being that is learning to meet myself where I am at. And what blocks us then, is a sense of where I think I should be versus where I am. And then, it keeps coming back to our ego blocking us, right? It would be weak to ask for help or seeking validation when, in fact, the real strength is to show our humanity and the support. That's why we have a Sangha. And, one of the famous quotes by the Buddha is, when the Sangha, maybe, I believe the Sangha is half of the path. And he said, no, it's the whole of the path. That we need support, that we need a community to support us because we have all these afflictions. We have all this conditioning. And in our conventional experience, it's important to learn how to let go of, it's really going back to what Will pointed out, is that idea, that sort of Judeo-Christian of this, strange resiliency, or that I should be like this, instead of the wisdom of recognizing that in my human condition, I need to learn how to set aside an image of myself and let people help me. And so that's, when we think about Sangha, we think about support, we think about groups, and we talk about Sundays. That's why we need to gather all the time. That's why we need to have these discussions all the time, because we forget. And then we also get ideas about how I think I should be. And instead of, what's coming up for me. So the other part of your question where you began was, all this is fine and good, except for how do I remember it? And we come up with this idea of practice. I was listening to a talk by Jetsuma Tenzin Palmer yesterday. Yeah, I think it was yesterday. And she points out that our big issues we forget. And so we learn something, we talk about something, and then we forget. And one of her primary practices has always been, as she was taught early on, to check her mind 3 times an hour. Okay. It's not a big inventory. It's not a check-in. It's not skillful or unskillful. It's a practice of just checking with your mind. Where's your mind? What are you thinking about? And then go back to what you're doing. And that type of a practice throughout the day can bring you back to a present moment and can always refresh. Because if we're not present, we can't do any of these healthy things very well. Because I'm an autopilot. I'm reactive. My body's triggered. I'm, in an activated state. I'm doing these things. But as I, have the capacity to keep checking in, I keep having an opportunity to come back to reality. And then also, you're already doing the right thing, right? Coming to group, Sangha, sharing and talking and asking and listening. And in that way, we can see how we can prevent ourselves from just meeting ourselves where we're at. And the big thing around that is we deprive other people the opportunity of being helpful. You know how good you feel when you're able to help someone. But we deprive others from that opportunity. Go ahead.
What if I what if I reach out and I'm met with indifference? Or what if I ask over time once and then I ask again? And, at what point,
Ask
am I,
somebody,
what?
ask somebody else.
Oh, well, yeah, right. That's the only thing you can do. But what if you just really need it from this one person?
Now I think we're caught in delusion.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, I have another piece of that question. What's a skillful way to ask?
Well, it depends on the need. I generally, if I need them, just say, "Hey, I'm struggling," and this is what's going on with me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Where we fall into trouble, and this is Carla here tonight? I'm scanning. Okay, Carla's not here. Yeah. We had a discussion around, what's the healthy thing to do? How do we get connected? A way to listen to our inner wisdom. And of course, she shoots me down. And like, doesn't work sometimes, right? And in that discussion, what's in the way is we want an outcome, right? And she was kind of hinting around stuff. So sometimes my perceived needs for help or for accessing, the way to engage my inner wisdom is my ego still wants a particular outcome and thinks that if that happens, then I'm going to be okay. So I need someone to be different. I need this thing to be different, or I want to feel different, or whatever the outcome is. And then we get trapped in a loop where we started, which is if this or that happens, then I'm going to be okay. Instead of a process of being vulnerable and just sharing and giving people the potential to be helpful. And that's a very different way of getting help. Because I don't really know which outcome is going to be helpful for me. I have an idea of what I get attached to and what I think, but often the outcome that's harder and is always acknowledged, the sandpaper is what shapes us. As we get some more challenging outcomes, which shows us something. But finding nurturing support, I think, is critical for the path. People that we can be vulnerable with, be safe with, and sometimes in a teacher role, especially, it can be hard to share, that forget appointments or stuff, for example. And so people get, sort of stuck that I can't be authentic. And then again, ego's in the way. So it's always this kind of ego process that keeps getting in the way of simply being authentic and working with the human condition. And authenticity is going to be really helpful. I'm not sure it's Kurt or Keith. One of you.
Yeah, it's Keith. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
One of the things, back to Will's question, comments, got me reflecting about this, and I really like everything you have to say about it, John, in terms of the self-centeredness and the ego. And but one of my go-tos is that intelligent regret, and thinking about my behaviors more in terms of skillful and unskillful, rather than that conditioned good or bad, that sort of moralizing inner voice, I've done bad, therefore I'm bad. But skillful and unskillful really shifts me out of that lane and into a more objective, less judgmental view of my behavior. It's skillful or it's unskillful. And if it's unskillful, it really is, I can usually trace it to my conditioning and to my habits and my tendencies. And then it's an opportunity to look at that and say, okay, it's almost good this came up, because I get to see more of my mind, more of my conditioning, more of my habits, more of my tendencies. And I've got to see them to be able to really work with them. And then I have an opportunity to work with them and, and work through the 4 opponent powers and make it right and work to do better, as right as I can, and work to do better next time. So
Yeah, thank you.
that's my thoughts about that.
Yeah, very helpful. I have a friend who's in the Zen tradition, who teaches. Now we talk about skillful and unskillful. He takes it a step further. He says, instead of unskillful, not yet skillful. I think that's too soft. Yeah, but it's nice, right? Not yet skillful. I'm learning. And it's nice to see. This is one of those situations I've shared this before, is where a High Lama, a Buddhist teacher, High Lama, is giving this teaching, and if you're the translator for a High Lama, you need to say exactly what he says. You can't. He says this, you say that. And so this teacher's giving his teaching, the translator's doing translation, and then he says something, the translator's like, that's not right, So he's like hesitating, but he paused and he goes back to the teacher in Tibetan, kind of asked his question for clarification, this and that, and the teacher realized what he said was incorrect. And then he just laughs out loud, busts up and says, not a Buddha yet, and, in front of everybody, it's like, and so it's good to remember we're not Buddhas yet. Okay. And the more I keep trying to compare myself to that, I'm going to struggle. But if I compare myself with the John I used to be 20 years ago, and by the way, just to clarify, it was more than a weekend workshop, a couple decades, okay, of practice that would help me get there. Chris.
Hey, everybody. Everybody's shares tonight really are hitting home for me too. I don't know, just this past Monday was really tough for me. I was kind of dealing with what felt like depression, and I don't know, John, it was just like, I felt like, man, this Buddhist path is letting me down. It's like it has nothing to offer for depression. It's like I feel like anger, anger and other emotional elements seem to be improving in my life, or maybe some not control of anger, let's say, but awareness of it, or just living, I guess, in a healthier way. But depression is a weird thing, and I've heard you talk about it in some of your old talks. When you were talking about you had your daughter and you got your first computer and some interesting stuff. So, I mean, just hearing people's stories sometimes helps, and it's nice that everybody's sharing, and I really appreciate that. But I was able to kind of sometimes when you're in depression, it's a bit of a spiral, and I was able to kind of hook in to exactly the bodhicitta uh, that we read, the six perfections, I guess. Yeah, I just said, like, maybe if I just work on generosity, just give myself something to hook into, kind of like, like a bit of a hook. And so, yeah, I guess Monday was bad, but then Tuesday, I'm like, I'm going to work on generosity, and just kind of gave myself something to focus on other than me. And now what's today? Wednesday? I feel pretty awesome. So, I think, I don't know, just sharing that experience, I guess, and not much else to share other than thanks for the guidance, appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Chris. It's so good to hear. And what a great point. That if I ever get done talking, I'll get to the second sentence. It's funny how one thing can unpack, and is the path of these things like generosity or ethics or patience, joyous effort, concentration, wisdom, so forth. These are tangible things that we can do that transform our lives. And so that generosity, when you're in that mode, we're not thinking about ourselves, right? When we're in gratitude, we're not self-obsessing. We're thinking about what we have. And when you're in generosity, you're thinking about helping others instead of ourselves. And so what a great step, what a great method, what a great practice you talk about, Chris. Noticing that and going, let me see what I can do. And something very straightforward like that. So coming back to refuge, when we have an established refuge or faith, it is a place in the storm of depression, the storm of fear, the storm of anxiety. It's a safe place to rest. Refuge is kind of like, our first refuge, run into mom, right? Mom's there, going to protect me. So it's that kind of refuge that when the things are triggered, when the events are there, when the despair is there, is, where's this refuge? And that is something that we can cultivate by collecting the evidence, recognizing these external outcomes that we get so attached to and want to control and navigate are actually the source of our suffering, not the cause of our well-being. Then there's a reverse opportunity that says, if I let go of that attachment belief system and have faith that my activities are what's going to change my life, my mental states, my attitudes, my generosity, my ethics, then it's like what Chris you basically shared, was there was a belief there that there's something you could do that could change something, and that was generosity. And then we have this stability and instability, a stable place and an unstable experience of life, something you can rely upon. And yeah, it takes time. But my encouragement is to start collecting evidence, noticing the insanity of hanging on to something that's creating my suffering, and see if we can let go of that. And in many of these examples, it was my insecurity and my ego. I'm not living up to something. I'm not the way I should be. I'm not this. I didn't do this right. All of that is our insecurity, our ego that's blocking us from just simply doing the next thing, asking for help or acknowledging a fault or apologizing or whatever. And that's what's always in the way. So let's see if we can collect some evidence for letting go of the set grasping and the insecure narrative of an ego. And a healthy ego isn't going to create those problems. When you have a sense of self-worth, it doesn't matter. I missed the appointment. I apologize, we're doing this, versus the story we can tell ourselves. And that is just the whole, when you look at all spiritual traditions, they're all trying to eliminate, it's the ego that's blocking us from reality and all that's good. And there's this great imagery, it was in a recovery book. It was more sort of God oriented, but it was like, God, good, the universe, everything wonderful, right here, big circle, a line, and I'm here. And the line is my ego, which is blocking me from everything that is wonderful, connected. So spiritual, connected, or disconnected. Am I independent, separate from, or a part of? Independence upon. And so noticing that we're always supported, we're always a part of something. And what can we do to be connected, to be authentic, to let our walls down a little bit, and just do the next healthy thing as best we can. And we might find some safety there. And that would be the only announcement. So let's go ahead and dedicate the merit that we have cultivated from our time together here. We have the dedication. Of all the things we could be doing on Wednesday night, we have made a conscious choice to do something healthy and beneficial to ourselves and for others. We've gathered together to support each other and engaging in a path of reconditioning to reality, to base our motivations out of loving kindness and compassion. And it is within this support that we can find the strength to engage in a path that takes effort, to find a refuge that we can rely upon. So we've cultivated a great deal of merit. We can dedicate this merit for the benefit of all sentient beings. I visualize putting that in the ocean of merit, the water that gives life to all. And for our own continued spiritual growth, that we can extract the essence of these teachings in ways that help us reduce our own suffering and wake up to reality rather than confusion. Be liberated from the misperceptions that imprison us. And let us dedicate. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forever.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om